Both Studio Drummer and Abbey Road Drummer are sample libraries built in a sampler called Kontakt, which is a very detailed, complicated sampler made by Native Instruments. Now, if you've not used Kontakt before, it can be a little tricky or not entirely intuitive how these things work, so I'm going to show you all of the basic functions. We have here, on the left, the Kontakt library, and you can see we've got a few different libraries from Complete, including Studio Drummer and 60s Drummer here. If we click the Instruments section under each of these, it'll actually open up and it will show us all the different instruments that come with this library. In this case, we have 3 kits, the Garage Kit, the Session Kit, and the Stadium Kit, and we have full and light versions of each of these kits. Now, the 3 kits are actually 3 different drum kits that have been recorded using different techniques. The Garage Kit is a kind of slightly dirty, very rock and roll sounding kit. The Session Kit is something I would expect to see in pop music or something like that. It's kind of more shiny and polished. And the Stadium Kit is a very big sounding rock kit with sort of big open room mics. It was probably recorded in a very large space to get that expansive sound. Now, the full versions are basically just the normal full version with all of the layers of samples, all of the detail. And the light versions are cut down. They take out a lot of the kind of additional layers and the variations in order to take up less memory. So if you're having issues with your computer, you can often do the programming using the light kit and then switch it to the full kit when you want to render it or bounce it out. We have the same thing below in 60s Drummer, but in this case we have early kit, which is a kit sort of in the style of the early 60s, and a late kit, which is in the style of the late 60s. Obviously, both these kits are very, very much modeled on what the Beatles were doing at those points in the 60s. Now, to load a kit, it's very simple. We're just going to double click, in this case, on the full Garage Kit. It's going to take a moment to load everything. And then it's going to pop up here. I'm going to select this Kit tab for now. Now, I can play very quickly a whole bunch of different drum sounds using my keyboard. Nice and straightforward. Let's have a quick run through of all the different interface options that are available. At the top, you have the kind of basic Kontakt stuff. You don't usually do anything with this. It'll let you kind of shift between snapshots or presets. There are a few options that are available. You can solo, but we don't need to worry about these for the most part. Down the bottom of the interface here, we have 4 tabs. Now the first is the Kit tab, and as you can see, this gives us a perspective on the kit overall. We can select different drums, like so. And down the bottom we can actually see some basic configuration options for each of these drums. We can control the amount of the overhead microphones, we can control the amount of the room microphones, we can actually change the tuning of the drum sound, and we have a basic attack, hold, decay sort of volume envelope that we can use to change the shape of the drum if we don't like the way it sounds as it was initially recorded. To be honest, you don't really end up using these controls all that much, but they're good to have if you need them. And next up, down the bottom, you have the options section here. And this is just what you would expect. Some configuration options, depending on the MIDI controller you're using, for example. You might want to change the velocity curve to make it more or less sensitive. Down here, you can access the MIDI mapping. By default, we're using the built-in one, but there are mappings for various V-drum kits and other bits of software if we're using MIDI from external sources. And we have a randomize function that gives us some kind of humanization, randomization controls that we'll talk about later. The next tab across on the left is the Groove library. Now, the grooves, or the Groove libraries, are one of the great things about working with sampled drums. And these are actually drums recorded on electronic kits, but typically by real and very, very skilled drummers, where they have loops or patterns in a whole bunch of different genres or styles recorded as MIDI that we can basically drag around, cut and paste, and assemble demos or even full songs out of. They can often sound fantastic, and I use them personally constantly as a way of coming up with new ideas to start a new song. To hear one of these, let's just go into the funk section. We're going to grab, say, a 100 BPM groove. We're going to take our Ableton tempo up on the left down to around 100, just so we're not playing this drum pattern like way too fast and making it sound weird. And if we double click on one, it'll load up here. If we hit play, you can hear we've got that groove playing. We'll talk a lot more about the Groove library and how to use it in a later video. The last of the tabs on the right is the mixer. Now, this mixer section is basically an emulation of an SSL console. We've got all these different microphone inputs, and they're all connected up as if we had them in a live session, connected in a very typical way to an SSL. We have, the standard things, EQ, compression, volume, all these things built in. So we can do a full mix inside the software here, or, and we'll talk about this later, you can actually bounce all of the individual microphones out into your DAW and process them independently using whatever software you want. At the top here, we have a couple of useful options. On the left are just mixer presets, which are sort of pre-configured positions for the mixer, especially if you don't know a lot about mixing drums. It's a great way to get a starting sound. And on the right, we just have sort of play, pause controls for the grooves, and we can move through the grooves. Also very useful. Now, one of the great things about using these native instrument libraries is that they all more or less use the same layout. So if we drag the Abbey Road 60s drummer in, you'll see it's set up exactly the same way. It sounds different, it has different grooves available, but the core interface is identical. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the kind of basic interface, getting familiar with it. In the next video, we're going to have a more detailed look at what actually makes up a modern drum kit, how they fit together, and how they're typically recorded.